So I was a guy that had quite a bit of fat on my frame. So I'll show you what I looked like back in 2014, where I wasn't happy with how I looked or how I felt. I did my first cut after 3 months. I took another photo, and as you can see, I look more like a skinny fat. I wasn't happy when I took that photo, so I did another bulk. I'll show you that photo. And then I did another cut after that. And then I went on to compete in my first ever amateur bodybuilding competition that I won. Did a bunch of photo shoots, did very well, and I managed to do things correctly in my second cut. So in this video, I'll be sharing with you exactly what I did to cut properly, coming up after the intro. Welcome back to my channel. It's Brad from bradnewtonfitness.com. So as some of you are aware, I was once a skinny fat guy, and I'll show you what I looked like during all of my 20s as a skinny fat guy. And I was not happy with that look, but there was a time before that where I had quite a bit of fat on my frame, and I was really struggling to figure out how to cut and get leaner. And I managed to figure it out. I managed to get leaner, but I also became skinny fat in the process. I wasn't happy with the skinny fat look. I tried to figure out how to get out of that. So then I started a proper bulk, and I then bulked up and then got to a point where I decided it was time to cut. And it was my second cut where I figured out how to apply the principles I'm going to share with you in this video. Got super lean, managed to keep all the muscle on my frame, or most of the muscle on my frame. And then I went on to compete in my first ever amateur bodybuilding competition. Did a couple of competitions, got first place in some of those. And then I went on to do some photo shoots. So I did everything naturally, no steroids, no performance enhancing drugs. So I'm going to share with you exactly what I did to cut without making the same mistakes that I did. So let's jump straight into the video on how to cut. So I'm making this video for anyone who's skinny fat out there and you want to cut, or you're at the end of your bulk, like I was as well, and you want to cut without making the same mistakes. So essentially what we're doing with cutting is that you want to maximize fat loss while maintaining as much muscle on your frame. That's the perfect nirvana of a cut. It's to maintain the muscle, lose the fat. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do that. I'll timestamp these 3 concepts here. Very much similar concepts to what I talked about in the previous video on how to bulk, right? So they're almost the same here when it comes to cutting. Nutrition, training, and patience. All 3 of these pillars are equally important. It's extremely important that you understand that. It was one of the main reasons why I was spinning my wheels for such a long time. I'll give you an example. So back in 2014, I'll show you the photo up on your screen once again, where I was training 3 to 4 days a week in the gym. And I did that for about 8 or 9 months when I took that photo. So when you look at that photo, it doesn't look like I've ever been to the gym before. You know, and that's why I was really confused, because after 8 or 9 months, I took that photo. I'm like, what is going on here? I've been to the gym, I've been doing my push-pull legs, I trained 3 to 4 days a week. I was doing night shift at the time. At that point in time, I actually thought it was my night shift and my cortisol levels, and the reason why I wasn't losing fat was because I had all this stress hormone in my body because of night shift. I thought it was my genetics, because I was patient. I was, trusting the process. I was training. But I didn't pay any attention to nutrition. I wasn't tracking my calories, I wasn't tracking my macros, I wasn't tracking my protein intake, and I was eating clean. Back in those days, I was eating clean. Raw vegan cheesecakes, quinoa salads, protein balls. I'd go to the vegan shop and buy all the raw, clean food, thinking that if I just ate clean, without tracking my calories and my macros, did the training thing and was patient, that I could eventually get shredded. No, that never happened. So I decided to pay attention to the calories and macros of that clean food. And it was a complete game changer for me. So it's important to consider all 3 when you're going on this journey to cut. You must consider all 3, right? So let's jump into the first one. We'll start with nutrition first. So the first thing I did for my second cut, I tracked my calories and my macros, but I figured out how many calories I needed to maintain a calorie deficit. Now, I'll link out down below a macronutrient calculator that you can go and calculate how many calories you need to maintain a cut and what your macronutrient target should be when you're cutting. So what your protein, carbohydrate, and fat requirements are during the cut. So I'll link that down below. So once I figured out my target calories for cutting and my macronutrient targets, which at that point in time was around 2,200 or 2,300 calories from memory. Okay, so I figured out that that was going to be my target calories for cutting. All right, and then I figured out my macronutrient targets as well. The second thing I did was I put those 4 numbers from my calculator, I put them into a cutting meal plan for guys. I'll link it down below. You can check out the one I used. Alternatively, you don't have to do it that way. You can use MyNetDiary or MyFitnessPal, which are completely free. And I've actually used these apps before during mini cuts and mini bulks later on, which I'll talk about in another video. So go and download. If you don't want to use the meal plan, the cutting meal plan, then you can use MyNetDiary or MyFitnessPal. They're completely free, MyFitnessPal. And all you need to do is you put in these numbers, your target calories for cutting and your 3 macronutrients, you put them into either one of these apps, MyNetDiary and MyFitnessPal, and then you just scan the barcodes of the different food items that you want to eat, and it will track everything for you. It's amazing. It really does work, and I do recommend you check that out at some point in your journey. But I'll leave it up to you. Decide whether you're going to use a cutting meal plan or MyNetDiary or MyFitnessPal. And then the second thing you're going to do is you're going to apply a 150 calorie buffer. Same thing with the bulk. Same thing if you watch that video on bulking, I talk about how it's important to have a buffer, because in my experience, dealing with people through my website over 6 or 7 years now, where people find their calorie target to be something like 2,264 calories, okay? So some people send me emails like, Brad, I've calculated my target calories, 2,264 calories. I'm short by 32 calories. And I always say, no, don't do that to yourself. You don't have to be so precise. The food labels on the food you eat are not even accurate. So there's no need to try and be perfect with this. When you find your calorie target, round that number, okay? Not 2,264, just round it to say 2,300, round it to the nearest 100. That's going to be your calorie target, 2,300. All right, this is an example. You're going to calculate your own using the link below. You're going to round the number, then you're going to apply a 150 calorie buffer around that number. So you're going to eat somewhere between 2,450 and 2,150, right? So there's a 150 calorie buffer either side of the target. Now, some people think, well, that's not accurate enough. It doesn't have to be perfectly accurate, especially if you're an absolute beginner. You don't need to be perfectly accurate. I do competitive bodybuilding. I was a little bit more accurate than this, but most people watching this are not doing bodybuilding competitions. So just have a little buffer, 150 calories, that's plus minus 150. Plus 150 calories, minus 150 calories. So if you eat within that range every day, then you're going to be okay. Right? It's going to be okay. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to aim for a weight loss target of between 1 to 2 pounds. I'm speaking to an American audience, I'm using pounds. 1 to 2 pounds per week. So many people get obsessive over trying to find the exact target calories. All right, I've seen this on my website over the years. There's no need to. There's so many different online calculators you can use. They all use different algorithms. There's the Kac-Mackardal model. There's so many different models. You don't need to try and work yourself up into a frenzy trying to find the exact calorie target. Round the number, apply your buffer, and then what you're going to do is you're going to see if you can lose around 1 to 2 pounds per week. Now, that is considered safe, healthy, and an efficient rate of weight loss every week. 1 to 2 pounds of weight per week. Now, of course, if you have a higher body fat percentage, like if you're a guy, you're 30, 40% body fat and above, you can get away with losing more than that per week, maybe 2 to 4 pounds per week. If you're relatively lean, say around 10, 12% body fat as a guy, then it's going to be less than that. It's going to be around 0.5 to 1 pound per week. Okay, so I've picked a number that's relatively sort of in the middle of the extreme ends of the body fat percentage spectrum. The more body fat percentage you are, the more you can safely lose per week. The less your body fat percentage, the less you can safely lose. Does that make sense? All right, so if you're not losing 1 to 2 pounds per week or thereabouts, then you need to adjust your target calorie number. So what I did personally, and I'll talk more about this in another video, I might make another video on it, but I definitely talk about this on my website. I'll link some articles down below. What I did myself was whenever I wasn't losing around 1 to 2 pounds per week, was I'd take my target calorie number and I would reduce it by 100 calories, right? So if there was like 7 to 10 days where I wasn't losing any weight, I was losing very, very little, then I would reduce my target by 100 and call my new target 2,200 calories. By the end of my cut, I was probably around 2,000 calories as my target. It's also important to point out that weight loss is not a linear process. When I say 1 to 2 pounds per week, I'm not talking about 1 to 2 pounds every week. On average, it will probably be around 1 to 2 pounds per week. But when you're starting a cut from a bulk, you're probably going to lose a little bit more, because when you go from bulking to cutting, you're probably reducing your carb intake, which means you're not going to be retaining as much water, which means that for maybe the first 1 or 2 weeks, you're going to lose a lot more water than fat. All right, that's completely normal. Then you'll get to a point where after 10 days or 2 weeks, that your weight loss will start to stabilize, okay? But then it's not a linear process. Most people, and I've thought this when I first started my journey as well, most people think that, oh, I am 115 kilos, I'm going back to kilos now, here, and that by week, just say by 12 weeks, they think that their weight loss is going to be a completely linear straight line, and that's just simply not how it works. 1 to 2 pounds per week on average, right? Not per week, it's not linear. It's more like this. Weight loss is more like this. It's more like the stock market at the moment. It's more like cryptocurrency at the moment, right? So on average, it's declining, but you'll have peaks and you'll have moments where it increases a little bit, it drops more, it increases and drops more. But over time, you want the number to drop, right? The average over time is what drops. The next one I want to talk about is protein. You've got to make sure you're getting enough protein. This seems like an oversimplification, but I'll throw a table up on your screen. It's from examine.com. Ideal protein intake based on your weight. It's a range. Now, a lot of people throw around, 1 gram per pound of body weight per day, which is the old bodybuilding rule of thumb that's been around for decades, right? 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. Now, that is a lot if you have a high body fat percentage. If you're watching this video, you're probably at a high body fat percentage and you want to cut. So 1 gram per pound of body weight per day is probably too much. Maybe 0.6, maybe 0.7 grams per pound of body weight per day. If your body fat percentage is really high, like 30, 40% body fat, it doesn't need to be that high. It doesn't need to be 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. 0.6 to 0.7 grams per pound of body weight per day at a high body fat percentage is reasonable. Otherwise, 1 gram per pound of body weight per day is fine. In terms of how to get all that protein, it can be a mission. If you're just starting, you're a beginner at all this, you might not know how much protein is in 100 grams of chicken or steak or nuts, or you might not know the calorie and macronutrient quantities in various food types. I respect that. I talk more about how to get your protein on my website. I'll link up some articles, but you must make sure you're getting enough protein every day. It's super important. Remember, one of the reasons why I became skinny fat was because my protein intake was around 70 to 80 grams per day. Now, of course, I didn't know that at the time. When I became skinny fat, I looked back through my training records and I realized I was only getting 76 grams of protein per day on average. And that was one of the reasons why I became skinny fat, because I was aggressively cutting my calories. Remember, the keyword is a slight calorie deficit. Slight, right? Slight calorie deficit. Usually 15 to 20% less calories below your maintenance. Don't worry, on my calculator, on my website, it simplifies the process, right? But if you want to read my article, I talk more about, slight calorie deficits, moderate calorie deficits, extreme calorie deficits. I was reducing, I was 50% below my maintenance calories in my first cut. I lost a bunch of muscle, my protein was really low. It's how I became skinny fat. I also did a ton of cardio. The rest is history. So let's move on to the next one, training. What did I do with my second cut and my first cut? I actually did things almost the same between my first cut and my second cut with my training, was I did push-pull legs. Now push-pull legs, I wrote an article for it. I'll link up that article down below on push-pull legs. But essentially, I started with 3 to 4 days of training per week. I actually started with 3 days of training per week. I used to work night shift. I had a grueling night shift roster, and it was relentless, working from 8 o'clock at night till 7 in the morning. And so I only had the energy to train 3 days per week initially. And I use push-pull legs. And essentially what push-pull legs is, without going into the detail, is that push-pull legs is just a methodology to training where you can essentially divide and conquer your muscle groups into 3 main training groups, 3 main muscle groups. So you have your push muscles, your pull muscles, and your legs, right? So what I did was something like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? But I actually, to be honest with you, I did legs first on Monday, then I did push on Wednesday, and then I did pull on Friday. That's how I did it, because I worked night shift, and I found that early on in the week with my night shift roster, it was much easier for me to do a leg day at the beginning of my night shift block than it was at the end of my night shift block. So you can pick the order that you want to do, push-pull legs. I just made sure that I had at least 24 hours to 48 hours rest between them. Now, if you're an absolute beginner starting a fitness journey and you're very new to the gym, then I suggest starting off with 3 days a week training in the gym. 3 days maximum for the first 6 months until your body gets used to training. Because I remember years ago when I first started my training journey, I did my first legs day, and it took me like 2 weeks to recover from legs. I couldn't walk properly for 2 weeks. There are a lot of trainers and coaches out there that prescribe 5-6 day programs per week to new trainees that are just starting. I think it's crazy, based on my experience with people on my website, based on how I remember my own training when I first started. It was very, very tough to do 3 days. I always found that I was very, very sore when I'd go back into the gym to do another round of push-pull legs the following week. So that's why I think when you're just starting out, don't kill yourself in the gym. It's already enough to deal with this pillar of nutrition. It's a lot to take in with this alone, let alone killing yourself in the gym. And also you might be working a night shift roster like I was. So I like to keep things super practical, super easy to follow. And then eventually after 6 months of training, it could be 8 months, it could be 12 months, everybody's different. If you want, you can scale this up to 4 or 5 days or even 6 days a week training if you want. Push-pull legs, push-pull legs. Or you can do full body, full body, full body. You can do upper lower splits. There's many different programs you can use, strong lifts, 5x5, whatever. But I used push-pull legs, okay? The next one I want to talk about for training is cardio. Now, a lot of people abuse cardio, and this is one of the reasons why I became skinny fat, was I was doing endless amounts of cardio in the gym, like hours a day. It was ridiculous. When you're doing hours and hours of cardio, a day, like I was, then you are setting yourself up to lose more muscle than fat. And you are putting yourself in a position, like I did, to become skinny fat. One of the reasons why I became skinny fat was not only because I was not getting enough protein, but I was also doing way too much cardio. Okay, so I lost a bunch of muscle in the process. So with my second cut, I became a lot more strategic with not just increasing my protein intake, and obviously tracking my calories and my macros, but how I programmed cardio. Now, cardio is not as necessary as what most people think. I use cardio as a tool. The way I programmed my cardio was that I did high intensity interval training. So I did moments where I did sprinting for 40 seconds to 60 seconds. And then I had a minute or 2 minutes rest where I'd just be walking on the treadmill. And then I sprint for 30, 40 seconds, all out intensity. And then I walk for 1 or 2 minutes. And I did that maybe 3 or 4 times. All right, that was my HIIT session. My HIIT sessions were around 20 minutes long total. right? I talk more about how I program my HIIT sessions on my website in an article. I'll link it up. So 20 minutes total for HIIT. And I did this maybe 3 times a week. 3 HIIT sessions a week, 20 minutes total, 5 minutes warm up, 5 minutes cool down. And the last one I want to talk about is patience, number 3. Now again, I won't spend too much time on this because I do talk about this in quite detail in other videos, but again, you could do all the right things with your tracking your calories and your macros and your protein intake, and you could be really on the ball with your nutrition, and you could be really on the ball with your training, but if you don't stick this out for more than a few weeks, then the whole thing will just fall apart. You know, it's very difficult to teach patience to somebody. I found that in my experience with helping people through my website over the years, that it's very difficult to say to somebody, you need to be patient. I found that in my experience, what I like to do is I like to show people what realistic rates of weight loss and fat loss are, what realistic rates of muscle gain are. And by teaching somebody the realistic rates of fat loss and building muscle are, it will set the precedence for patience. Because I find that if you don't tell people how much fat or weight they're likely to lose, that's healthy and safe, if I don't teach you that or show you that, then you have no idea what to expect. And you're likely to take shortcuts, you're likely to fall into silly fad diets and programs, and I've done all that stuff, I've made all these mistakes. I lived a life in my fitness journey where I was very impatient, and I was very impatient because I bought into a lot of programs that were just complete garbage. That promise that I get super shredded in 30 days, that I get, into the best shape of my life after, taking some fat burner and doing that for 2 months and wasting hundreds of dollars. And I just was impatient. I was sold the wrong expectations, like most of you probably watching this. So I like to set very clear expectations up front, hoping that indirectly it will give you the patience necessary to stay the course through nutrition and training. I'll give you a practical analogy that you can skip in the timestamp. If you don't want to listen to this, that's completely fine. It's actually unrelated to fitness, it's more related to flying. I have my pilot's license and I really struggled, back in the day to learn how to land an aircraft. I was with my instructor. And so I was really impatient. I was doing circuit training, you're flying a rectangular box and learning how to take off and land. And I really struggled with the landing. The takeoff, the crosswind, downwind, base legs, I was fine. But when it came to landing, I screwed up every time. We'd come down and smash down on the runway. There were other times where I'd flare too much and then I'd be, floating down the end of the runway, and I was really flustered and frustrated and I was almost ready to give up. I was impatient. My instructor was very patient. In fact, if you are a flight instructor, you have to be extremely patient. He said, mate, you just need to do this, be patient, it will come. And I thought at one point I wasn't cut out for this. Like probably you're watching this going, my genetics are screwed, my body frame won't allow me to get into the best shape of my life. Like I felt when I was doing my pilot's license training that I felt like I wasn't cut out for this, that it wasn't for me. I don't have the intelligence, I don't have the patience, I don't have the ability. And I eventually I kept going with it. I kept smashing the plane on the runway, like not smashing it sounds very dramatic, like really hitting hard on the runway. And eventually through my instructor persevering with me and convincing me just to give it another try, you've almost got it, you've almost got it, you've almost got it, just be patient. I managed to land properly and then he sent me off for my first solo. Long story short, I managed to get my full pilot's license and I managed to break through that. And it's almost the same as fitness in a way, is that there are moments in time where you really just need to trust the process and trust that if you do the right things with your nutrition and training, you put those two together and you just have faith and trust in the process, that you kind of have to, and you also have to forget about all the other garbage programs that you were on previously and just give this a good chance that you will eventually get the results. And I did with my flying, obviously I did with my fitness as well. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll link up some stuff down below. I will do my best to help you out. Send me an email, go to my website, all that good stuff. And I'll see you in episode 10.